everybody, welcome back to the journey of my YouTube channel, where today I am doing an overall recap of my 2022 reading. So I think that's going to be really fun on its own, but I am also going to try something new. I'm going to try also recording my screen and showing you that. So I might make some beginner mistakes that will be funny for you to enjoy watching, and we will just see how that goes. But what I want to do is look through my StoryGraph stats. And I haven't been using StoryGraph up until now. I just uploaded everything from Goodreads yesterday because I wanted to see the pie charts. So I haven't looked through them yet. I did look at the first one a little bit, but for the most part, I am not sure what they're going to say. So I'll be reacting to those, and I'm curious to see what all StoryGraph even has. But first, just a few general stats that I calculated on my own. So my reading goal for this year was 60 books, and I did not read 60 books this year. I read 80 or 85 or 88 or 82 or 83. So it really depends on how you calculate some things, because I read 3 of my author conservatory classmates' novellas this year, so obviously I can't list those on Goodreads because they are not published yet. So it's questionable whether I should count those 3 or not. And Goodreads is also counting the 3 Skyward Flight novellas as 3 different books, whereas I think they should maybe just be counted as one, so that is a little bit debatable. And Goodreads also has 3 books listed for 2022 that I really read in 2021, but I think I just finished them slightly after New Year, so they should really count for my 2021 reading instead. So it's a little bit hard to count exactly how many books I read this year. It kind of depends on how you want to count them. The number that I averaged out is 84. So if you kind of put everything together and average out the different ways of counting, let's just say I read 84 books this year. But regardless of whether it's 80 or 88, that is way more books than I've ever read. Last year I read 61 books, and that was definitely my record at the time. And then this year I went and read 20 plus more books beyond that. So that's been kind of crazy. And what's also been cool about that is that I would say not just my quantity of reading has increased, but also my quality of reading, kind of like I talked about in my end of year book tag. I've learned a lot this year about what I like to read and what I don't like to read. So I've been picking a lot more books that I've really enjoyed. And I think the main reason that I've read so much is just that I've wanted to read so much more than I used to, because I'm finding more books that are really my kind of book and that I really want to read. So just a big factor was that when I had time, I wanted to read a few chapters. And also, like I mentioned in that tag, I've been reading a huge variety of books at the same time. So that helps me keep up my energy and my focus for reading in general, to be constantly switching between different options rather than just plugging away at one book or one type of book all the time. I also had a goal of reading 12 nonfiction books this year, so one per month, and I did not read 12 nonfiction books this year. I read 14, so I squeezed in a couple of extra ones in this last couple of months, and I really enjoyed my nonfiction reading as well. That is greatly increased from what it used to be. I used to very, very rarely read nonfiction books at all, so I'm glad to have introduced some more of those into my reading diet. I definitely want to continue that next year. And I also think, and this math may not exactly add up because of the different ways of calculating which books I read this year, and also genres are a little bit subjective sometimes, but I would say my best guess is that I read about 39 fantasy books this year, so something like 3 a month. I read about 20 sci-fi books, so something like 2 a month. And then I read about 15 books that aren't speculative fiction, so history, mystery, contemporary, and all of that. I read about 1 per month, but a little bit more than 1 per month. So obviously fantasy is dominating my reading statistics, with sci-fi being the second most common type of book that I read. And then I also read 15 classics, which I counted among the other genres, so that's not in addition to the other genres. I read some fantasy and some sci-fi and some non-speculative classics, but I read at least 1 classic a month, which was my goal, and then I also read a few more classics than 1 per month. And as you're going to see when I make my top 10 of 2022 video, quite a few of those classics ended up on that list. I ended up really enjoying pretty much every classic that I read. Not all of them were my favorite book ever, but I still really enjoyed the experience of reading them. I felt like I learned a lot from them and gained a lot from them. So I'm definitely glad I read a lot of classics this year, and I will probably want to read even more classics next year. I want to read at least as many classics as this year, and it will probably be good to even expand that. Okay, so here's where I will start the screen recording part and the Storygraph part. So this will be fun. We'll see how this goes. So it looks like for some reason Storygraph is only showing 71 of the books that I read this year. If any of you know why maybe it didn't get all of my books from Goodreads, maybe you can help me out with that and help me learn the ways of Storygraph. But I imagine that it's still going to give a pretty accurate general overview. So we'll just see what we've got here. For moves, this is the one that I did already look at. So I saw that my biggest mood is definitely adventurous. That is not a surprise. I'm actually pretty happy about that. Reflective is also not really a surprise given that I did read quite a few nonfiction books this year, and I also read quite a few classics this year, so that makes sense. Mysterious, I'm happy about that. I'm slightly surprised since I think I only read one actual mystery book this year, which was And Then There Were None. But I guess some of the other books that I read just have a mysterious tone or mood to them, which I'm also happy about. I do consider that one of my favorite things to read. Emotional, yes, lots of that. I'm kind of surprised that this isn't more actually. Except that maybe fantasy and sci-fi aren't considered the most emotional genres in general. Informative, not that much information, I guess. Although I did read quite a few nonfiction books. Dark, again, I'm kind of surprised that this is not a bigger slice. Challenging, I wish that were a bigger slice. Funny, evidently I should read more humorous books because I didn't do that a lot. Lighthearted, yeah, that should be small. I don't read much lighthearted stuff. Tense, really surprised that this is not bigger because I've read a lot of tense books this year. And then pace. So I'm actually very balanced on this, it looks like. I'm a little surprised that it says I read more slow than fast-paced stuff, but I guess since I read quite a lot of classics this year, that kind of makes sense. And medium paced is my biggest spot. And I think that's how I would want it to be. I definitely get tired of really slow paced books very quickly, but also if books are super fast paced and it's just action all the time, I'm not gonna like that either. Like I really want the characters to stop and reflect about things sometimes. So probably medium pace is my favorite, and so that kind of makes sense. Oh, you can click on a segment to view the books. Now I'm kind of curious what my like one, oh, I had one relaxing book. What was that? Oh, okay. Weary World Rejoices is relaxing, I guess. Okay, page number. Yes, this feels fairly accurate in general to my reading, where I mostly live in in this area, but also that's a fifth of my books. Over a fifth of my books are more than 500 pages, so quite a few chunky ones. But then almost a third of my books are under 300. So yeah, that's probably true. I mean, even some of the classics that I read this year, as I mentioned in some of my videos about them, were shorter than I thought. So yeah, that adds up. Fiction versus nonfiction. Yeah, even though all of my books didn't make it into these statistics, I do think this is a fairly accurate pie chart for my fiction versus nonfiction. And then my genres. Yes, definitely fantasy at the top here. It counts 33, so that's pretty close. It counts 17 as classics, so that is actually my second largest statistic. I'm surprised that sci-fi is down here at fourth. It only counted 12 sci-fi books, which surprises me. So maybe those were some of the ones that did not carry over. And 15 young adult. That's interesting, but that's probably true though. I mean, a lot of people count Harry Potter as young adult, and I read 6 of those this year, so that could contribute to that. Middle grade is pretty big. It's it's in my top 5 genres, so that makes sense. And I think it's kind of funny that speculative fiction is down here, but I guess that means that it's not normal fantasy or sci-fi. I'm curious what's in this category. Okay, Left Behind. Speaker for the Dead is not in sci-fi. That explains some things. And Ender Shadow and Shadow the Hedgehog. Okay, interesting. So basically, um, speculative fiction is just other sci-fi books that didn't get categorized as sci-fi. Okay, historical is very small, yes. Children, small, yeah, that makes sense. What's my one dystopian book? Is it The Giver? It's Left Behind. Okay, I guess that should be categorized as dystopian. That's not quite how I think of it. Art, short stories. What short stories did I read this year? Oh yeah. It's a novel, but close enough. It's funny that the other Skyward Flight books don't show up as short stories. Anything else I want to check on here? Graphic novel? Oh, The Lightning Thief is on here as a graphic novel. Well, I didn't read it as a graphic novel. So that would be another one to go in the fantasy category. So yeah, these are some of my tags from Goodreads, but I don't keep up with those very well. Format, and this I'm surprised that this actually does look kind of accurate because I don't bother really logging the format of the books that I read. But I did attempt one audiobook this year, but it was really old CDs that didn't work, so I gave up on that and switched to digital. And I did do several ebooks this year, so that makes sense. But definitely mostly print books. I try to read most of my books in print. That's definitely what I prefer. My most read authors. Brandon Sanderson, yup. I am planning on making an entire video actually ranking all of my Brandon Sanderson reads from 2022. Orson Scott Card, yes, this is true, tied with J.K. Rowling, which this should be 6, and this one should, let's see. Yeah, I've read I think more like 7 Orson Scott Card books this year, so we should really be second. Yeah, Andy Wilson, yep, I read 3 of his books. I finished the 100 Cupboards series at the beginning of the year, and then just here at the end of the year, I read Ashtown Burials. Yeah, so 2 Trenton Lee Stewart, 2 J.R. Tolkien. What's the other one? Silmarillion. Oh yeah, The Hobbit. I really technically read last year, but yeah, 2 Frank Herbert, 2 C.S. Lewis. Yep. I started and ended the year with C.S. Lewis with Till We Have Faces and That Hideous Strength. Languages. I guess the Welsh is probably from Beowulf. But yeah, everything was in English. Number of books and pages. Okay, I am satisfied that the graph actually reflects this because July and October are the 2 months when I actually bothered to make reading wrap-ups because I read so many books those months. So yeah, you can see here that those were my really big months of the year and my main 2 reasons that I read so ridiculously many more books than I thought that I was going to. So yeah, generally these lines track together as one would expect. But I guess in April, my pages read were higher and my books read were lower. Interesting. Star ratings. I really didn't rate many books this year, so that's not going to reflect anything too accurately. I just left reviews for a few friends' books, so that one doesn't mean much. But yeah, I guess those are all the graphs. So that was very interesting, even though it doesn't have every single book that I read this year. It's still very interesting to see these general trends, and I do think for the most part it was fairly accurate. So I thought that was fun. If you guys have StoryGraph, let me know what some of your stats were. I'm really curious what everybody else's reading stats were for the year, and if you have any tips on how to use StoryGraph to the maximum, then let me know that as well. And if you have tips for recording your screen and adding it to a YouTube video, feel free to share because I am just doing that for the first time with this video. So hopefully nothing goes too wrong in the editing process. Hopefully everything works out with that, but we shall see. And then my next video should be about my top 10 reads of 2022, which is really exciting. That's always one of my favorite things to do at the end of the year is talk about my favorite 10 books from the year before. So that will be next, and I would love for you guys to join me in that when I make it. And until then, thanks for journeying with me. Bye!